Hello and welcome everybody to our Patriotism Silo Tech for Good event. Today we have with us Owen Fuller, Kim Wittman, and Sunny Washington will be doing most of the moderation. So if you have questions, feel free to type them into the chat. This is a recorded session and we will be broadcasting it on our social channels and it will live on our YouTube as well. So if you have things that you would like to discuss or things that come up and you want to send it to somebody, we will make that accessible for you. Sunny, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and then we can have our panelists introduce themselves?
Sure. So my name is Sunny Washington. I'm the CEO of Utah Tech Leads. We are a membership organization that works with tech companies to bring representation in terms of legislation, working with legislators, and then just making sure that we're all involved in the things that are important to us to make our state a great community and a great place for our businesses to thrive. Owen, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, you bet. I'm Owen Fuller. I'm the CEO of Lucidpress. And we're one of the software companies here in Utah. We're very excited to be announcing a rebrand next month too. I won't do a sneak peek and tell you what we will be becoming, but I'm really excited about that. And what our software does is we make it quick and easy for anyone to create on-brand materials. And I think I probably get asked to come to these events because I get involved in the world of politics too. So I was a volunteer on John Curtis's campaign in 2017, as well as Governor Cox's campaign in 2020. And so that puts me sometimes at this intersection of politics and business in our community, and happy to be here. It's a challenging topic for a lot of people. And like I was saying before we got the recording started, I'm really looking forward to learning from Kim on what we should be doing.
Kim, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Nothing like a great segue like that. So thank you, Owen. I'm Kim Wittman. I'm the Senior Vice President of HR here at Vivint, and I've been with the company for 8.5 years. I lead all of our HR function, and I'm really excited about this topic because I think that it is something that is really important for us just to have conversation about. When we don't openly talk about things, there's no right or wrong way to kind of go into these topics, but I think that this is a really important thing for us all to learn from one another. So I'm really excited to learn from Owen. Vivint has 12,000 employees and we have 1.9 million customers across all of the United States and Canada. And so we're constantly learning, right? We have a lot of incoming questions, incoming just responses from our people. And so this is something I'm really excited to talk about so I can also learn how to help kind of continue to evolve our approach in the future.
Great. Well, thank you for both being here. You guys are both friends. And so I appreciate you putting yourself in the hot seat for us. Liz, did you want to start with the first question?
So there is a lot happening in our state and in our country right now that is generating a lot of media, a lot of attention, a lot of protests, a lot of discussion. And so I would love to know if you have a policy at your company on like how individual employees are supposed to talk to each other about that. And I'm going to add if that policy is effective, because we know that there are a lot of policies, but conflict can still arise and like how you manage that.
Owen, do you want to start?
Sure, happy to. You know, I don't think that our policies are anything that would be too surprising in this regard as far as how employees interact with each other. We ask them to be respectful, be kind, and to be thoughtful of others. And so, you know, I do think there's a different dynamic in different companies based on their size or other factors. In our company, we're just over 50 people. We do have some people that are in other countries as well. And so there's just kind of a general sentiment of being very respectful of people that have other views and creating room and space where people can talk about what they're thinking or feeling, but to do that in a way that kind of keeps the public square open for people to talk about what they need or want to talk about. We haven't had any issues, fortunately, where it's become like a hot button issue that I'm aware of. I mean, I guess something could have happened, but we have great, support from people outside of things to kind of manage that. But I'm not aware of where it's become an issue yet in the way that we work together. But it is an issue with the way people feel. People just are feeling a lot of things. And they have been for some time. I mean, if you look back over the past few years, there's just been a lot that people are feeling in regards to that. And I do think that as the leader of the company, it's important to be aware of that and to find ways to make myself available, in particular as the CEO, to address that and to talk about it, both on one-on-one or in group settings or with the whole company as appropriate.
Awesome. I think similarly, Owen, we don't actually have a stated policy around internal communication. We have a very strong set of core values that we are consistently talking about, that we tie our work to, that we tie promotions to, that we tie advancement to. And so it's a very well-established part of just how we interact with one another. And that's really what we try to focus on, is creating a place where we're living our values and people feel like they can bring their whole selves to work, but do it in a very respectful manner, and that we can win together. So that's one of our core values, is we win together. And this comes up, I think, from time to time. We're a little bit different than Owen. We have 12,000 employees, and it's actually quite distributed. So the majority of our employees are not in the state of Utah. We have a lot. But it's evolved over time, where most of our contact centers in the past were here in Utah. We've moved to more of a remote model for our contact centers. So that's moved our population even more outside of the state of Utah. So we really have kind of 3 or 4 main buckets of employees, and we actually have some different communication tools for each of those groups. So as an example, we have a really large 1099 workforce on our sales and install side. And they primarily, they're basically on most of our systems, but they don't have the same kind of working cadence on email and communication channels that are standard. It's a lot of text, a lot of other apps that they use to communicate with one another. So we don't actually have some of those same kind of mechanisms for knowing the types of communication that they're having. And we don't monitor that super closely. But what we do, we have put into place, because as you can imagine, with having so many employees that are in so many different parts of the country and have different communication channels, we actually have a really strong social media policy. And that actually does influence a lot of, I think, how we think about internal communication as well. And a lot of the social media policy for us is really centered around being very respectful. I think that's going to be a consistent word that you hear throughout this conversation, right? Is demonstrating respect for one another, and then not taking a stance that would be deemed as representing the company, right? And representing yourself versus representing a company. And so that's something that we really kind of make sure that we're constantly talking about. It's in all of our trainings, it's in our compliance trainings. And it's really just in the way that we're trying to communicate with our employees. We really do try to demonstrate that respect, and that we're not hiding from topics, but we're not also taking really strong stances, because we know that our employee population is very diverse, and everyone is going to have a different approach and a different view on these areas. And so what we really do try to focus on is employee experience, and making sure that goes all the way from how we attract employees to their experience here, the benefits that we provide them, the work, communication from their leaders, and that's been really productive for us.
I have a follow-up to that as well. So again, you both mentioned respectful, but when you're in individual conversations and when you think about the term respectful, what does that mean to each one of you?
Yeah, maybe I'll share a few thoughts on that. One is, I think it's important to always think about getting permission to talk about certain things, if it's possible, or if it's not already assumed, perhaps because of a relationship that's so strong and past conversations or something like that. Meaning like, hey, this is something that's really on my mind. Would it be okay if we talk about it for a bit? That can kind of give people a little bit of a buffer in a room, a chance to kind of pull themselves out of a conversation before it begins, if that isn't something they want to talk about. Other little tips, I think, on being respectful in conversations are, when you're thinking about these hot button issues, I think it's important to try to understand the most charitable kind of version of any side's view on a particular topic. And that if you want to talk about something in a respectful way, that's really important work to be done. Like, what is the, and I think it's probably more interesting for people if we talk a little bit less in generalities and more in specifics, and it's also more dangerous. So, here goes. Let me give an example. Is that, like, it's very difficult to have respectful conversations around politics if the only two sides in a particular issue are something like, if you believe this, you must disrespect and hate women, and if you believe this, you must like murdering babies. That's pretty hard. It's pretty hard to find room for a respectful conversation if those are the only two positions that are available. And so, I think there are a lot of forces working against us having respectful conversations about politics, not just in work, but in any setting. But I think it's really important as leaders in companies to think through what are the most charitable, to kind of versions of different takes on these things, and to see from things from that lens. And then I like to really watch for when we're being emotionally kind of triggered by the conversation. And I know, like, things that I see in myself would be when I'm talking in absolutes, I'm probably responding from a really emotional place. Like, everyone who does this is blank, or every single time this comes up, boom, this happens, and that's a normal human thing. But I try to watch for those triggers, and I try to watch how I'm feeling in my gut. And if I'm really just responding out of a place of, like, pure emotion on something, and that's showing in my wording and in the way I feel in my body, then I think maybe I better give myself a little, like, timeout. I'm certainly imperfect in it. I don't mean to suggest that anything different, but those are a few tips in my mind on how to have respectful conversations around these hard topics.
Yeah.
Oh, and I love that. I think that, I think it starts with ourselves, right? It starts with the individual. And I think that that's a great tip that I'm going to make sure I take back to my team too.
Yeah, and I can attest, because you and I have had several discussions, and we don't always agree. But when we have these discussions, at least I know that we respect each other, and our differences in perspective, that it's not a ding at me or a ding at you, but there is this overwhelming feeling of respect. And I think that's and you bringing up asking for consent to have these discussions, because they can be, for some people it is absolutely triggering and emotional. And I think quite honestly, like, a lot of women I've talked to are exhausted. The last several days have been particularly hard on them, and so being aware of that, I think, is so key. So I appreciate that. So today's voting day, in the primaries in Utah. Do you guys do anything? Like, do you tell people to vote? Do you talk about elections? Do you encourage your people to meet with representatives or anything like that?
Yeah, I can take this. So we actually don't do anything to specifically guide folks one way or the other. But what we really try to strongly do is remind people of our voting policy. So we have a time off policy that allows people the space to go and vote. And we try to make that very apparent to our individual contributors and to our managers. And then we also try to provide coaching to our managers on, how to handle that and how to accommodate people to ensure that they're having the ability to go and do it. So we're showing our support by not by giving people the space, but not kind of leading them one way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd agree. We want people to be involved, and I mean, we think that that's healthy and good. And so that's what we encourage people to do. As our workforce is primarily Utah-based, and mail-in voting is so big here, we haven't done something like making, election day a day off. Although, there's a lot of talk around that as a potential thing that the state could do or something else. But we encourage people to get involved.
Yeah, great.
You mentioned silencing your notifications from Slack. And so let's talk about messaging apps, especially at work. we all know that those can get out of hand, and they can get out of hand fast. And sometimes it's in a private chat just between 2 or 3 people. And sometimes it's in one of your specific work channels. So how do you all manage those kinds of environments for your employees, especially for those employees who might not necessarily live here or work in state, but are then all of a sudden seeing information about state activities, or for those people who do live here and like are getting input from out of state employees? Like, how do you manage those conversations? And do you guys have policies surrounding those conversations?
Yeah, I can take this. We have a lot of communication channels. So unfortunately, we're on multiple platforms. And so it makes it actually even harder. So we have Teams as our primary system. And so we use that for most of our population. Our tech teams use Slack and Teams. And then we actually have another messaging app that we're just migrating off of right now in the field. So it definitely becomes very hard to proactively be monitoring this. And so that's not something we actually put a lot of focus around. We really try to empower and educate our managers and our leaders on, hey, what should you be looking for? How can you set the right tone on your team? And then, you know, as things are coming up, and we have had some examples where, just as an example, last year I was watching the presidential, or not last year, oh my gosh, it feels like it was last year. A few years ago, I was watching the presidential debate, and I started getting all of these text messages that were like, hey, you should go into the Slack channel. There's some pretty heated conversation that's happening at the moment. And so I think our leaders are, you know, aware of when they need to bring in support or when they need to, you know, intervene and say, hey, let's make sure that we're really being, again, respectful of one another. And sometimes, you know, what I've seen some of our best leaders do is they go in and they don't, you know, go in and hard-handedly stop the conversation, but they try to insert a different point of view, or they say, hey, this might be a better conversation for face-to-face. Because what we have seen is, and I'm sure you've all seen this too, is in the digital age, people are much more bold behind a keyboard than they are when they can see your eyeballs, especially when you're face to face. So I think that that's been a really effective approach for us, is not a monitoring policy, not having bots that are looking for certain things, but just empowering our leaders with the right way to approach things and creating really good spaces for our teams to communicate in.
Yeah, amen. And I would just add a couple other little notes on that. One is try to really make sure that we convey to our team that their voice matters and that there's an open door policy to talk with HR, with their managers, with me, about anything that's happening in their work experience that is detrimental to them being successful and effective in their jobs. And so that has been a thing where sometimes I've had someone say, you know, this conversation feels like it's getting off the rails for me in a messaging app. And I won't say what time in my career or what company. I don't mean to throw that out there, but that's happened for sure. And I always appreciate people speaking up on that so that we can try to make sure that we keep an environment that's a reasonable person would feel really comfortable in and good about the way that environment is setting them up to succeed. But a couple other things is, like, I do think that in the messaging app world, sometimes there's like issues of commission and omission. And so I wanted to call that out as well, because one of the times that I was asked to kind of intervene, there had been links shared in messaging apps that had really troubling, problematic things on them. And all that had happened is they'd been shared and there was no interaction with them. But the simple fact that they were shared and no one said anything about them left people feeling really uncomfortable. And so, you know, we had to kind of talk about that. It wasn't just so much that there was a heated conversation to intervene in, but, you know, to kind of keep that in mind too, as something to be aware of, that it can look like the company might even be supporting something if there are links or things that are shared and no comment is made, kind of like Kim was suggesting. I'll tell on myself on one thing that happened that I felt quite bad about, and I guess the best ones to tell are myself and not about others, right? But I was giving a big presentation to, I think, the entire company at the time, and I was doing it from a home office, and I had a bookshelf behind me, and I did not realize that the classic history book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, was behind me on the shelf, which it is a great book of history about what happened in World War II, but the spine has a huge Nazi symbol on it.
Oh,
And so, it was just, I'm talking to the whole company, and then someone like shared a screenshot right after, was like, I don't know, this seemed a little bit weird. And of course it hadn't even occurred to me that that was in the shot. And I did, reach out to I sent a note to the entire company afterwards just to explain, what the book was and to be really clear about that. And not because I thought, not because anyone had already said that, that was a big thing, but I certainly didn't want to give the impression that I was, putting up a Nazi symbol in the background as a little statement to the company. And so, I think just being aware of our surroundings and how what we say and do is coming across on these is pretty important too. And then, also with that, one final note is to remind each other to have grace with each other when things like that happen, and to try to create an environment where, I think as a leader, if you're showing grace when things happen, and you're, assuming the best intent in general until proven otherwise in things, that helps create an environment where people will hopefully extend that same grace to you. And I know that I need that as CEO.
I love that, talking about grace. There's this great book that I've read called Don't Label Me. And there is just this discussion about giving people grace, because I think of myself, things that I may not be proud of, thoughts that I've had, or things that I've said 10, 20 years ago. And I would hate for anyone to judge me who I am today based on that one instance. And so if I want that type of forgiveness and grace, then I need to extend that to others as well. And then knowing that, we have to look at people as a whole person. We may not agree on one particular thing, but it doesn't mean that they're scorched earth and we can't ever have a conversation. And I think that's really important, especially today when it's so polarized. You're either or, you're in one camp or the other, it's black and white, there's no gray. And I think it's really exhausting, for a lot of people, when I think a lot of us are various shades of gray, and we can interact and talk to each other. That brings us to our next question. So more and more companies are feeling, especially the larger ones, the pressure to take a political stance from customers, from employees, from media. A good example of this is like when Disney did not make a public statement on Florida's Don't Say Gay law. And then the employees were upset and protested. And then they did take a public stance. And then they felt retaliation from, the Florida GOP. I mean, that's just, it's almost a no-win situation. Do you guys ever, as companies, take a political stance? Who wants to take that, Kim or Owen?
I'll take it. And we, I would say there's three types of ways of approaching that. There is the leading out, there's a fast follow, and there's lagging. And I think that Utah companies, as I've seen it, have not usually been on the cutting edge of leading out. And I would say Vivint is not a company who you're going to see kind of taking that leading edge. We're probably going to be taking some time to really reflect on the impact to our entire employee base and our customer base, right? Because some of these things are Utah centric, some of them are nationwide. And so for that, from that standpoint, we actually really do take a stance to for where it does impact our employees, where it does impact our customers. And we actually saw that during the kind of first stages right after George Floyd and some of the social unrest that was happening with some of the riots. We actually uncovered some ways that our customers, we could help protect our customers in different ways. We had someone who had their business broken into, and we have codes that they have to give us in order to dispatch police. And so we recognize that in that particular situation, we could have done something more to help protect the individual that was trying to escape the crowd that was coming at them. And so we've made changes that way, and we communicate that to our customers, we communicate that to our employees, but we're not taking kind of that leading step of making those political statements.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this. And I do think that, again, there are forces that are at play in our society right now that do push companies to feel pressure to take a stand. And a few of those things are, the saying used to be all politics are local, but now I don't think that's quite right. I know Governor Cox says this pretty often, but it feels more like all politics are national. And so there's kind of this expectation that there's the national news of the day, there's the news cycle that's always on, and there's kind of an expectation for people to respond to that. And I think that there's also this thing that I sometimes will call the political industrial complex, which is like, media, which is focused on one particular political perspective, kind of driving a large group of people to feel like only one way is the okay or right way to think about things, and really harshly attacking other views. And that's kind of the reality that we live in. And so, I think a lot of companies are doing that, and there will be some people voting with their feet, right? Like there are people who are going to be on the leading edge, and they're going to say, I want to work at companies who are very much like in an activist like role as their business. And I think that that's companies' prerogative to go that route, and people kind of decide if that's where they want to go. I don't want to lead my company in that way. And the reason being is that I feel like there are some things that are kind of beyond the pale. And since I already brought him up once, there's a quote that all political conversations eventually find their way to Hitler. And here I'm going to bring him up again for the second time in this call. But there are some certain things that to me are like, outside of the reasonable window of discourse. Like, is it okay to do this thing or to support this view in a company setting, or in to be espousing views of a certain type in even like a work environment or that kind of thing. But I think there's a big, broad window of discourse that actually should be acceptable for people to feel like they believe different ways, they vote different ways. And I want a wide group of people in our company. I don't want to self-select for only a certain narrow group of worldviews. One time I was in the deep South, and I decided I would only listen to the most conservative radio that I could find for the entire trip while I rented my car, and just see what I heard. And I heard advertisement after advertisement about like very specific products that their main selling point was that they were made by Patriots, the Freedom Phone or whatever it may be. And I thought, I don't want to live in a world where every one of our products and services is sliced and diced up based on what part of the political spectrum people happen to believe in. I would like to provide our service for essentially all the businesses in the world. And so, with a few exceptions, the ones I think are doing really bad things. So in that kind of reasonable middle, that's where I want our company to be. And what that means is we're probably not going to be leading out. But when we have things like, for example, Pride Month, just to be specific, it was a really interesting kind of experience because we talked about as a leadership team, how are we going to engage with Pride Month? And there's a whole range of how you see companies engage with something like Pride Month. And I talked to some members of my team who identify as LGBTQ+, and they told me that what matters most to us is that we feel so valued and whole and comfortable being ourselves here. Like that's the core, and that's what we've got, and that's actually what we need to make sure we maintain. And then how we kind of participate on top of that, I think there's a range of ways we could do that. And so, there will be a Pride trivia event, which I think is the last Pride event that our company had that some people are putting together. We've used it as an opportunity to reflect on the experiences of different people, both in the work setting and in our state and country, to think about how we can commit ourselves to being respectful again and going back to the core values that we talked about. But we didn't, I'll say, like have a company sponsored sort of participation in all the events that we could be in. And so that's how we're trying to find our path, is focus on the core of what matters for the experience of our employees, which is that they really feel respected and whole. And we'll continue to find our way there. And I don't say that putting down anybody else who chooses to go another route with their own company.
Mhm. And I think that's fair that each company has their own flavor of what that means. But yeah, it's been really fascinating where, employees demand people to take a stance, or you get called out on Twitter, right? Like, and then all of a sudden people are boycott so-and-so, and, it's really, really fascinating how far and wide that can go. Liz, did you want to ask the next question?
Yeah, so we've talked a little bit about like the broader aspects of this and how you all manage those. And we've also talked about that when you come to a conversation with two very sturdy opposing views, you're probably not going to end up in any kind of a positive space. But how do the two of you make sure the teams that you work with regularly feel like they have a place to vent or a voice, and that they're heard, and that they're continue to be respected in their professional roles, even if they hold views that might be opposing to other people?
Yeah, so I mentioned a few times manager training and manager support, especially in a company our size. That's been the most effective approach for us. And it's actually something I truly believe in, is if we have a company full of really well trained leaders that can lead through these conversations, then that the employee's experience is going to be significantly better. So just as an example of some of the things that we've done, and we've had a lot of practice over the last 2 years. COVID was very controversial, especially with all of the different types of employees that we have and the roles that they play. Not our employee population was mostly still having to show up every day. We have customers in, or we have techs in customers' homes, and we can't, have everybody working remotely. So we spent a lot of time on helping leaders through constructive conflict. How do you, engage teams to talk about things and set good expectations on the front side versus like trying to deal with conflict after it's already erupted? So that's one important point. Another thing that we just did is we actually engaged our benefits providers and our benefits teams to do some training with our leaders on our our EAP program, employee assistance program. And to Sunny's point earlier on just the emotional toll that all of this takes on people, there's a piece of this that's really important, that we help our leaders just give space to people to talk about not their political views per se, but just the impact that it has on them and how they show up every day. So giving people a voice on, when they're just exhausted, when they may need to take a personal day, when they need additional support and someone to talk to, what are the resources that we have readily available, so that managers aren't also trying to, solve all of the individual problems, but sending them to the right people and helping curate a great experience for folks. This to me is just politics can, to Owen's point, I think a little bit, be the enemy of diversity if you let it get too separated, right? Where you have people that are, you're just wanting to allow one conversation to happen. Diversity and inclusion happens when we bring people together with a lot of different views, but the only way you can do that productively is if you give them the guidance and you give them the space to practice. Sometimes they fail. I know we've had lots of times where we've had leaders that have failed through these conversations and they feel horrible, but then they learn from it and they're able to, give the point of view of what they learned in those, and it actually makes their teams even stronger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Owen, what about you?
I would second what Kim said. I thought she said it super well. And if there was only, one other piece that I would add, is just that I try to be, I try to make sure that there's room for people to express their personal views and the ways they do it. And because your coworkers so often become some of your best friends. And so, we will spend time outside of work in a number of settings, and I try to make sure that they feel comfortable and supported in sharing their personal views when I have a chance to do that, even when they're certainly, and maybe especially when they're different from mine, because it is a little bit of a challenging thing for me as the CEO of the company, who also is pretty outspoken in personal settings about things that I believe in strongly politically. For example, I helped organize and led a rally about Ukraine. And, while that is one that there's generally a lot of sentiment in support of Ukraine with what's happened right now, there are people that feel differently about certain nuances of how Ukraine should be supported, or even beyond that, there's other, ideas about what the origin of the conflict is and that kind of thing. And so what I want to have is a space where individuals can and do speak out loudly and boldly about the things that they believe in, because they care about our community, and we only have one community, so we better cherish it and build it up together. And yet I want to, in every way in the work setting, make sure that they know that all of that is aside from these values that we have, that we're working together in this big business vision that we have, that we're trying to work together on to make the world a better place in our own lane. And I hope that that's the balance that we're striking, is that in personal settings where people are representing themselves, that they speak out, and we value that again in a wide range of topics. There are some things that can be beyond the pale, but pretty much the big broad down the fairway path is get involved, and that's good.
Yeah. Well, as we asked this last question, if anyone has any other questions, please post them in the chat and we'll leave some time for Q&A. But we didn't, when we scheduled this several weeks ago, we didn't anticipate what was going to be happening on the federal level, and then also on the state level with Roe v. Wade. So if I'm sure everybody's informed, but yeah, Roe v. Wade was overturned by the Supreme Court, which implemented a trigger ban that happened in Utah almost effectively. This was, and now it's paused for 14 days. It's very complex, but it's kind of really messing with a lot of people, and there's a lot of emotion about it. And Owen, you talked about this earlier, where you said, if we look at everything, it's, if you're in the pro-choice or the pro-life, it can be very divisive. I'd love to get your thoughts on that. We did a survey. We had about 100 companies respond. 38% of the company, we just wanted to know. We're not stating an opinion or a stance at this time, but we wanted to know, will it impact your workforce? And if Roe v. Wade was overturned, 38% said yes, 17% said maybe. And then the 45%, I hope that's the right math, but 45% said it would not. And we got a variety of comments, from yes, because it'll hinder our ability to recruit, to killing the unborn is murder. We got a variety of that, but we just wanted to understand, do some of these things that are divisive and more considered maybe moral issues, do they have an economic impact, and what that would be? How are you handling this? I mean, has there been discussions at the office about this? One of the biggest questions that we got from our survey was, we would love to know what other companies are doing, because they anticipated that there was, this is unprecedented for a lot of companies to have to deal with this. So, we would love to know if you've done anything, had any discussions, and what your plans are. Don't jump to.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Owen.
I'll go ahead, and I'll be brief, because I think Kim will have better answers than me. But first thing that I would say is that, political issues aside, I don't think it's too much to ask, or too high of a bar of expectations, for business leaders to just care when their people are hurting, whatever that may be. In this case, there are certainly people that are celebrating this announcement from the Supreme Court, and there are also people who are hurting. And I think that it's important to just start from a place of compassion for people who are hurting. In this particular topic, I mentioned things that you can tell you're having an emotional response. This one is a very, very deep topic for people on multiple kind of points of this broader issue. And I think that it has to do often, I think we respond most emotionally when it feels like it's attacking our very identity of who we are. And and this issue hits on that for people. Like, this hits right at home. And so, what I have been watching closely is what's happening in Utah. You gave the quick overview there, Sunny, and there has been this stay now, and trying to understand what's happening here, because our primary employee base is here. And during this time, my plan is pretty simply to talk with folks, to talk, and especially in this case with this issue, with women on our team, most specifically, and to understand how they're doing, how they're feeling about it. And I haven't yet made a decision on what might be like a company response or policy. I saw that Atlassian, who's a big tech giant, came out with a statement saying that it was a strong statement against what the Supreme Court ruled, and said that they would be paying for women and another guest to go to another state if they felt like they needed to have an abortion, and that they would be covering that. So I think, when there are companies taking positions like that very publicly, it does prompt even more questions among an employee base for what is our policy relative to this. And so my plan is to talk, to listen, and then we'll see, and to be very well informed about what these things actually mean, which sometimes can get lost in the conversation, right? When a big point of news comes, not everybody is hearing, okay, this is exactly where we're at, and this is what this means, in our case in Utah. So that's where I'm at, and I don't mean that to be a non-answer, but that's just the kind of facts on the ground today. Is I think that it's a lot of listening and trying to understand if there needs to be a policy change for us.
Right.
This new environment.
Well, when you do decide on one, we'd love to know it and just share it out, because like I said, there's a lot of people that are saying we would just love to know what other people are doing. Kim, do you guys have anything over at Vivint?
Yes. So to your point on what's everyone doing, we actually yesterday had spent some time starting on Friday, but then followed up yesterday with our benefits broker. And they actually, because we're exploring what our current benefits policies are to the impact on the employees, right? This is a medical impact in many ways. And so what I'm trying to dig in and understand is what is our current offering, and what are the options that we would have to explore, right? And to Owen's point, I think right now there is some information gathering that's happening. And the question we always ask our benefits broker is, what are other companies in our region doing? And so, and every company is kind of doing the same thing right now, is exploring what does the plan have in it today? What plan changes would have to be made to accommodate any changes that are going to impact our employees that are on benefits? Because again, we have employees that are across every state. And so what we're also trying to do is understand the state by state impact, because every state has, to your point, Sunny, we have things that are happening in Utah that are actually still in play right now. And so our legal counsel is trying to understand, what is happening by state? What does that impact have on us as an organization? What does that have on our employees? And then what do we need to be looking at to help address any of those impacts? And we haven't got to a place where we've made a decision, because again, we're still trying to gather some of that data just based on the state by state impact that it has on our employee base.
And I tried to have conversations with both Senator Dan McKay and Representative Lisenby, who are co-sponsor of the trigger ban. Both of them wouldn't have a conversation with me. So I was hoping to have some answers, because I think it is concerning that because there are some scenarios, like, for example, if you have been raped, or in a case of incest, there has to be a police report. Does that police report have to be shared with an employer to notify them that this would qualify? There are a lot of nuances and things that we need to know. And I'm hoping at some point the representatives that sponsored this legislation will have that conversation with us, so we can better guide and inform our companies.
And Sunny, I think that's a really important point, is there are so many government agencies right now weighing in on this. It's also, we have EEOC, you have URSA, you have all of these different compliance entities that are trying to help navigate this. And so I do think that there is more to come on what the impacts and how companies navigate that, especially based on different sizes of companies. I think oftentimes our employees At Vivint, oftentimes our employees think, oh, well, I sit here in the corporate office and I need you to make a decision based on what's happening here in the state of Utah, when our employees are spread out all across the country. So we're trying to make the best informed decision to create really great experiences for all of our employees.
Yep, that's great.
We have a couple questions from the peanut gallery, as it were. How do you make sure that you're not tone policing the people who are like the most impacted by recent or in the past changes or future changes? How do you make sure that those individuals who get hit the hardest by certain things feel like they can really discuss it and talk it out, even with people who might not be as equally as impacted?
We actually prop them up. So instead of like, we actually look for ways to give them a stage to have the conversation. So we've done this over a few different events throughout the last few years. And we actually have a diversity council that we did a traveling diversity council where we went to different parts of the country, and we intentionally brought together employees that could give us perspective that wasn't the common narrative. And we uncovered a lot by giving them a stage and being proactive about that. Things we didn't know, things that were actually quite alarming to us, that we were shocked that hadn't been raised before we proactively did that. And I think that was my learning, was oftentimes people don't feel confident to share their stories of negative impact because they're scared of what that means. And they also feel so alone in that. And so I think where you give that, it actually creates positive momentum. And we saw more people share their stories. And we're able to change our policies, both from how we interacted with customers to how we supported and kept our employees safe. So just as an example, because I, like Owen, like to be more concrete about these things, is we actually learned that in our inside sales call center, oftentimes when people were scheduling a technician to come out to their home after they had purchased the system, that there were times, and this was not common, but there were times that customers would ask for a white installer. And we immediately put a policy in place to say that that is not something that we are going to tolerate. And actually, if that was an issue for a customer, that we would be okay with walking away from that customer. And we empowered our reps that were talking with that customer on the phone to make that decision real time versus like have to feel like they were trying to navigate that on their own. So I think where you can be proactive and you can help them, then you're going to uncover even more because people will feel safe.
Fantastic. Owen, I have a question kind of targeted towards you. How do you feel that tech is going to engage politically over the next 5 years, let's say? Do you think, I mean, we see a lot of pictures of, like, I think it was Rudy Gobert hanging out with our AG, who's wearing the most atrocious shirt I've ever seen in my entire life. Like, that's jarring, right? But how do you expect tech to interact with not only the current leaders, but with future leaders in our political space?
I think we'll see increasing engagement from the tech community in the politics here in Utah. And I think that's kind of a function of our tech community maturing. And what I mean by that is not to say that necessarily to call us out as immature before, although maybe that's fair too. But my point would be, just as an entrepreneur, I think a lot of times when you're getting started, your first thought is not really much to do with the politics of where you're at, as long as it's not in your way, as long as it's not holding you back, because it takes such single-minded focus to get something off the ground and to build something where there was nothing before. It's like, just stay away from me, like stay off my back, stay out of my wallet, and just like, let me go build this thing, because I'm trying to make the world a better place. And then as your company grows and you get to have more employees, and the last company where I was an executive, we had hundreds of employees in Utah at the time when I was there. You start to realize that the issues of the community really do impact your employee base a lot, and they impact your ability to recruit at scale as you need to then fill the spots for your business. And the community at large also starts to have an impact on if you're going to open another office here or not, because can you get the people here? And with tech becoming not just the largest sector, but the fastest growing sector in our economy here in Utah, it's just inevitable. And so we're seeing a lot more of that. I see a lot of engagement actually now that I didn't see maybe even 5 years ago. So I think that trend will just continue. And, one thing that I'd say too is I don't think that it's monolithic. Like, I don't think that that involvement just takes only one shape. But, I appreciated, Sunny was kind to say some nice things about me earlier about like how we can engage in an environment of respect. And I wanted to like send that back to Sunny as well. But a little plug for Utah Tech Leads is that what I really admire about what you're doing is you're saying, let's get involved and let's go make a difference. There are things that we want to see to be better and different in our state. And sometimes, no matter what part of the political spectrum you might find yourself in personally, it can be so overwhelming to be in the environment that we're in that it can feel pointless. It can feel like it's not worth engaging. And so I just wanted to give a ton of respect to you, Sunny, for leading out, and Liz for jumping in to make a difference and to make our state better. And I think that I would certainly hope that we see a lot more of that involvement rather than a lot less over the next 5 years. And that's what I predict will happen.
Oh, and I really appreciate that. I mean, you have my heart, and you too, Kim. I think I appreciate you guys taking the time to have this conversation with us. I have, coming from tech, and I can echo what Owen has said is when you're building a company, you're so singularly focused that you don't think about all these other things. And for me to kind of jump into this space and with Utah Tech Leads and working with Liz and other tech leaders like Kim and Owen, I really enjoy the work because I am convinced that we can make a huge difference here. And sometimes we don't know how to always be effective. And sometimes it sounds like we're shouting into the wind, on Twitter, and no one's paying attention. But there are ways for us to be effective and make our own little community a lot better. It's so easy to get overwhelmed, I think, from a national standpoint or an international standpoint. But here, where we can have a lot of control from, school boards to city council to, our own representatives. We've got Rosemary Lesser here, Representative Lesser, I know I can send her a text and she's going to respond to me, and that's really fantastic. So I encourage you guys to continue to get involved. Thank you so much for doing this. This was so helpful. And I know it's not always a pleasant topic to talk about, but you're really inspiring a lot of people to engage a lot more. So I appreciate the time.
Thanks, Sunny.
We appreciate it.
Liz.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
Take care.